I come to the floor this evening to urge that Congress speak with one voice at a critical time on an urgent matter. The fight for freedom is being waged in Ukraine right now, and the outcome is going to have profound effects, not just in Eastern Europe, but around the globe. Russia has invaded Ukraine twice in the last 8 years, illegally annexing Crimea, inserting troops and offensive military equipment into the Donbas region in the east. They've initiated cyber attacks against public and private entities in Ukraine, and they continue to use disinformation to try to destabilize the democratically elected government in Kyiv. Now the Russians have gone further by amassing more than 100,000 troops under the command of 100 tactical groups on Russia's Ukrainian border. This Russian deployment includes rockets, tanks, and artillery, and is no longer just on the eastern border of Ukraine, but now on the northern border, where Russian combat troops and heavy equipment have moved into Belarus and in Crimea in the Black Sea area. Let me give a little history as to how we got here. 8 years ago, Ukraine made a choice. The people of Ukraine stood up to a corrupt Russian-backed government in 2014 and made a conscious decision to turn to the West, to the European Union, to the United States. I was in Ukraine in 2014, shortly after what is called the Euromaidan, or the Revolution of Dignity. When I was there in 2014, the Revolution of Dignity barricades were still up. And in the center of town, the Maidan was still occupied by Ukrainian patriots who were determined that their country not go backwards. The Ukrainian people at that time rejected authoritarianism. They said instead they were choosing democracy, freedom of speech, and freedom to gather, respect for the rule of law, and free markets. Turning to us. Despite Russia's unrelenting efforts at destabilization over the past 8 years, the Ukrainian people are more committed than ever to an independent, sovereign, and democratic nation. And Ukrainians today are increasingly patriotic and opposed to the Russian efforts to destabilize their country. They don't want state control, repression, and fear. They choose liberty and prosperity. Moscow would have the world believe that somehow this massive, unwarranted Russian buildup is about trying to shore up its border against some threats from Ukraine and NATO. This is, of course, patently false. Ukraine's military posture has always been purely defensive, and unlike Russia, Ukraine has upheld its commitments under the Minsk agreements, which were designed to ensure a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine in the Donbas region. NATO, of course, is a defensive alliance and is no threat to Russian territorial integrity. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg recently told reporters that, quote, the significant movement of Russian troops into Ukraine's neighbor Belarus is the biggest Russian deployment there since the Cold War, end quote. And Russian troop numbers in Belarus are likely to climb to 30,000 with the backing of special forces, advanced fighter jets, short-range ballistic missiles, and S-400 ground-to-air missile defense systems. This is new. By the way, Ukraine's not asking for us to fight these wars for them. They have been in a war with Russia over the past 8 years. They have lost over 14,000 Ukrainians to this battle, including at the line of contact where there's been a hot conflict. I've been to the line of contact. I've seen it. I've seen where the Russian snipers have killed Ukrainian soldiers. I've talked to the soldiers from Ukraine who are determined, committed, and patriotic. 14,000 people. If you compare the population of Ukraine to our population here in the United States of America, that would be the equivalent of us losing about 120,000 Americans over the past 8 years to an enemy. That's more people than we lost in Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan combined. Think how we would feel. This is how the Ukrainians feel. Ukraine is not asking, again, for us to fight their war for them, but they are asking for increased lethal military assistance to help defend themselves should Russia make a big mistake and decide to invade further into Ukraine. When it comes to our allies, I've been pleased that most have really stepped up to help Ukraine during this crisis. The British have provided anti-tank missiles. When I was in Ukraine recently with a congressional delegation, as we left the airport, This was about 3 weeks ago. A cargo plane arrived, an American-made cargo plane, with weapons from the UK. The United Kingdom was providing anti-tank weapons to Ukraine. I saw them being unloaded, and I saw the smiles on the faces of the Ukrainians, knowing that this will give them a better chance to defend themselves. We appreciate the Brits. The Canadians have helped, specifically recently providing important training on some of the new equipment they're getting. The Danes have helped with additional funding, and the Baltics have transferred weapons as well. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania have all been strongly supportive. Poland has been so supportive. So many others. We need all of our allies to step up like that, certainly all of our NATO allies, but really all freedom-loving countries around the world. This is where the cause of freedom is being fought right now. My hope is that Congress can come together and speak with one voice, Republicans and Democrats alike, pass bipartisan sanctions and legislation, and an aid package that sends a strong message of support to the Ukrainian people, a message that we stand with them in their fight for freedom, but also sends a strong message to Russia that if they choose to invade further, the armed conflict will carry a heavy cost. The sanctions will be devastating. And finally, legislation that sends a strong message to the world that the United States stands with its allies in Eastern Europe and throughout freedom-loving countries across the world. The time to speak is now, with one voice. The world is listening and watching. Mr. President, I ask the Madam's consent that my further remarks appear in another part of the congressional record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm pleased to come to the Senate floor today to speak in support of a bill sponsored by the entire Ohio delegation, naming the post office in Avondale of Cincinnati, Ohio, for two World War II aviators, John Lear and Herbert Heilbrunn. These two remarkable men, one black and one white, grew up in Avondale, which is a neighborhood part of Cincinnati, Ohio. They dreamed of flying and signed up for the Army Air Corps after Pearl Harbor. John Lear flew the P-51 Mustang with the Tuskegee Airmen, and Herb Heilbrunn flew the B-17 bomber. The Tuskegee fighters were assigned to protect the bombers in the European theater. John and Herb worked together on some of the same missions, but as World War II airmen, they were segregated and did not interact. They didn't get to know each other until more than 50 years after the war ended. In 1997, Herb Heilbrunn discovered that an event for the Tuskegee Airmen was going to be held in downtown Cincinnati. He decided to stop by and thank the fighter pilots who have helped protect him and his bomber squad in Europe. There, Herb met John Lear, and the two men hit it off and discovered how much they had in common. They found out they had both grown up in Avondale, both spent time waiting for training, working at the same engine plant, Wright Aeronautical in Lockland, Ohio. They realized they had been in the same third grade class at North Avondale Elementary School. Luckily, Herb had saved the class picture, and there you can see them standing right next to each other, John and Herb. Their friendship was obviously meant to be. John Lear had long wanted to make sure that young people knew about the Tuskegee Airmen and their contributions during the war. Together, John and Herb shared their story with school children and adults, talking about how things were different in the past and promoting racial understanding and the rejection of bigotry today. Here they are with a group of young people, Herb and John, with models of the airplanes that they flew. The Harvard Foundation for Intercultural and Race Relations honored them for their work in 2003, and in 2007 there was a book, Black and White American Airmen, Their True History, and it recounts their story. John died in 2015 at the age of 94. Herb died in 2020 at 100 years old. I believe naming this post office in their neighborhood for John Lear and Herb Heilbrunn is a fitting way to honor the memory of this team, who served our country with bravery and distinction in World War II, but then continued an important part of their public service long after their military service ended. My hope is that this legislation will be passed by the Senate on a bipartisan basis, and we can name this post office after these two remarkable men. Madam Chair, finally, I want to acknowledge someone who's in the chamber tonight. I want to acknowledge her dedicated service. This is one of my senior staff members who is moving to Richmond, Virginia to join the new Virginia governor's administration. Angie Youngin is an Ohio native and an Ashland University graduate who is very proud of that, and who was the scheduler for my predecessor, Senator George Voinovich. I have had the good fortune of having her on my team. Her loyalty, hard work, and judgment over the past 8 years is deeply appreciated. So, Angie Youngin, we will miss you here on Capitol Hill, but best of luck in your new adventure. I yield back my time.
Under the previous order, the Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow.